The BS Report is presented by Subway. Football season is over. Foot-long season is just beginning. For a limited time, get any piled high regular footlong for just $5. Any footlong, just $5. Hurry in, Subway. Eat fresh. Eat fresh. The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't
The
care.
BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
All right, it's a Monday afternoon. The NFL has gone haywire, and anytime that happens, we have to bring our friend in from the National Football Post, Mr. Mike Lombardi. What's happening?
Well, I think the Obama stimulus package worked in Washington, and it's working all over the NFL right now.
Well, the Haynesworth contract, 7 years, like $7,000 million, but really, as Peter King pointed out today, it's a 4-year, $48 million deal.
Right, with most of it guaranteed.
With most of it, with 41 of the 48 million guaranteed.
Right.
So why do they? I mean, why? What is the point of just bumping up the figures of this contract? Like in year 5, if they exercise his option for year 5, his cap figure would be $29 million. There's no way they're going to pay him $29 million in the 5th year. So really, it's a 4-year, $48 million deal with $41 million guaranteed.
Part of it is to sell themselves back to the Titans and say, look, we got this enormous contract. We wanted $100 million, and what reported all over the weekend was, this is the largest contract since Peyton Manning, a non-quarterback, and that's the kind of thing that the agents like to hear because that'll help them in recruiting.
So the agents just lie, basically.
I don't know if it's lie. I think it's advertising. I mean, you're a fan of Madman. I'm sure it would be a way of advertising.
Well, I mean, there's a difference in advertising and lying.
Well, it's skewing the truth. Every deal in the National Football League, regardless of what's reported, is valued over the first 3 years of the contract. That's what the players value their deal. That's what the clubs look at the deal. Everything's measured on 3 years. Everything's measured on how much of percentage of guarantee. Players like to get over 50% of their 3-year comp guaranteed. So if you get $30 million for 3, they want $15 million of that guaranteed, and anything above that is obviously in the negotiation. So that's how you have to value contracts.
So for my next contract, I'll ask for 4 years for whatever million, and then I'll say for the 5th year, $35 million, but you guys have the option to get out of that and not pay it. And then I will become the biggest, the most successful sports columnist and the most highly paid ever by a wide margin just because I have this bogus deal.
And you'll raise the market. I mean, now, you take the Nnamdi Asomugha contract that the Raiders gave him. I mean, the 3rd year, he's in the top 5 quarterback pay scale. So essentially that was a 2-year deal at $28 million. That's still a large contract. But, are you going to pay Nnamdi Asomugha of the top 5 of the club option of the top 5 of the quarterbacks in the NFL?
No.
So obviously that was a 2-year deal. But, that assured the player of them becoming a free agent. And sometimes these deals that look ridiculous are looking ridiculous so that the player's assured he's a free agent. For example, Haynesworth in the 5th year will be a free agent.
Right. And to get 41 of 48 million guaranteed in 4 years, that's got to be the highest percentage of guaranteed money ever for that price, right?
No question about that.
What was like the previous record holder?
That's the essence of the deal. Well, I don't know the specific numbers, but Peyton's deal had enormous amounts of guarantee. And what the fans don't understand about the NFL is because there is so many rules involving guaranteed money, and clubs have to send the guarantees to the league office to put them in a trust account so that they're secured and that they're funded, that it's very difficult to have contracts with complete guarantees like the NBA. So there's mechanisms to work around the funding issues, and that's what a lot of these contracts do. It looks like one thing, but it's really something else. And that's really because the rules that are in effect in the NFL are still the funding rules going back to George Halas and Vince Lombardi of the day, because they didn't want teams to do like Ted Stepien did, the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers, and guarantee money that he didn't have.
Right. So with the Haynesworth thing, now we don't know what's going to happen with the salary cap for the next, we don't know what it's going to look like in 2012, right?
Right.
Do we know what it's going to look like in 2011?
Well, it could be uncapped, and if the union decertifies, then there is no cap, because then they can't get locked out. And this is all about labor law, which I'm not an expert in.
Right.
So the cap could be a thing of the past. I mean, next year we go uncapped. For example, there was much to do about Matt Cassel being traded for not getting an extension, but in essence, Matt Cassel has a 2-year contract, because next year we are uncapped, and Matt Cassel won't have 6 years of accrued season, so he will be in a restricted free agent. So what the Chiefs did was they traded for a 2-year contract.
Right. But with the uncapped whatever looming, which I do think will happen, don't you feel like that was part of why Snyder did what it did? Because that team makes a ton of money, and he knows that really from a cap standpoint, that contract's only going to hurt him for 1 year, maybe 2, but then after that, he'll probably be outspending almost everybody anyway.
Yeah, he's one of the guys who's going to outspend anybody because of just the nature of how he does business. I mean, he's got that 90,000-seat stadium. He's got luxury seat holders. He's got a cash cow, and even though he has a high debt service for paying for the team, he still has a unique way of making money. So, but I think the other thing's going to happen, Bill. I think a lot of teams in the league are going to take an approach that, like the Florida Marlins, hey, we're only going to spend X amount of dollars on players, and we got to find a way to win that way.
So you think almost like baseball?
Exactly like baseball.
You're going to have your Yankees, Red Sox types, which will be the Redskins and the Cowboys and a couple others. Then you'll have, I think the Patriots would almost be like in that Billy Bean Moneyball type, right?
Yeah, they will definitely not overspend. It's like, I don't believe this Boston Herald report today that the Patriots are going after Julius Peppers. It doesn't fit what they do. Julius Peppers makes more money than Tom Brady, and the one thing you have to know about the Patriots, they're not paying any player more than Tom Brady.
Right. They have the old Red Auerbach philosophy of you pay your best player the most money. You don't want to pay your third best player.
And the Redskin approach, and you have to be cautionary here, is if you don't have a quarterback, it doesn't matter how much money you're spending on anybody.
Is it a good idea to give Albert Haynesworth $41 million guaranteed?
Albert Haynesworth is a unique player, and he changes the game. And there's a lot of people in the league that I trust and listen to that disagree with me, because I didn't have a real problem with the Albert Haynesworth deal, because I believe he's one of the unique players that he'll make Jason Taylor better, and he'll make Andre Carter better, and he'll make their defense better. They were 4th ranked in the NFL last year in defense. They just couldn't create any turnovers.
But wait a second, though. Are you sold on him now that he has this guaranteed money playing with that same intensity?
Yeah, because the defensive coordinator is a man by the name of Greg Blosh, who's an old defensive line coach, and he's a crusty guy. And Albert Haynesworth needs somebody who's constantly going to put his foot up his butt, because that's what defensive linemen typically do. If defensive linemen were nice and polite, they would be called offensive linemen. They require a lot of attention. It doesn't matter who you're dealing with. Just some stories get out that others. Albert Haynesworth can change the game. The other 2 contracts the Redskins did, to me, are just mind-boggling. It doesn't make any sense.
Mind-boggling? That's an understatement. D'Angelo Hall?
Yeah, D'Angelo Hall.
That was like $30 million higher. I mean, granted, they tweaked the figures, but should that guy be making more than, I don't know, $3-4 million a year?
I never saw it. I said this. Eddie Royal's got to be wondering what he's going to get paid after what he did to D'Angelo Hall on opening day when Denver played him out in Oakland. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. And then, Derek Dockery was really a guy that the Buffalo Bills wanted to bench all season. They just had so much money wrapped up into him they couldn't do it, and then the Redskins went right back and signed him. So this will be really interesting. And again, for the Redskins, it comes down to this. Can they actually get any play out of their quarterback? Is he going to be good enough?
My buddy House, diehard Redskins fan, we might have to call him after we talk to you. He is just so outraged by what the Redskins have done, like to the point that he's almost thinking of just dropping them. Like he just, in his mind, like for them to spend this much money on this many guys over the past few years, a recipe that has not worked And then they kind of do it even in a more mammoth fashion this year. Like, at some point, don't you have to realize maybe you got to change the way you're thinking a little bit?
You know, when you own the team, you don't have to. That's the beautiful thing with Dan Snyder, and that's why people say, hey, you know, if this doesn't work, somebody's head's going to roll. Nobody's head's going to roll in Washington other than Jim Zorn if he doesn't win, because the owner made all these decisions. Yeah. I mean, it was pretty clear today, you know. Serrato is just the conduit between the agents and what Daniel Snyder wants to do. So, you know, all he does is come to him and say, Dan, do you think we should pay this? And that's what they do.
Well, somebody like Snyder and the Redskins, those are the guys that keep agents in business. All you need is like one or two of those guys. And you can just they set the market for everybody else, unfortunately. Let's talk about the Cassel trade, which you brought up. My thought heading into this whole offseason, basically last week when we knew stuff was going to start happening, I thought for sure that they'd get, like, worst case scenario, a third-round pick this year and a first next year, or just a first this year, or a first and a third next year, or something. But to find out that it was only the 34th pick and that's all they got, I was just dumbfounded.
Oh, I think the Chiefs made out better than anybody could have hoped for. I thought it was going to take a 1 and a 2 and wrote that. But what happens a lot of times are you can't get teams to make decisions. The Patriots had no interest in the top 10 pick. They wanted something less than that because they don't want to pay that freight. Again, it goes back to the Tom Brady thing we talked about.
Well, and also the stupid rookie salary scale that they have, that it really is one of the dumbest things in sports right now.
Only for the top 10 players.
Yes.
You know, only for the top 10 players in the draft. So, you know, what happened is a lot of times teams just don't seem to, and you talk about this all in the NBA, they don't just seem to want to jump up. I mean, Minnesota's trades for Sage Rosenfels, wouldn't they have been better off trading for Matt Cassel?
I thought they were the logical team. After talking about this with my dad for about 6.5 hours on Saturday, you know, Minnesota seemed like the logical team, but they gave away 2 firsts for Jared Allen. Didn't they? Yeah,
they did. They paid and look what Jared Allen did for their football team.
But I mean, they didn't really have any first-round picks left to give out. The team I don't understand is the Lions, because you're going to tell me you're going to bring in Stafford from Georgia, who's like about 15 years old. You're just going to throw him into this horrible franchise that is being in upheaval again next year with a whole new regime and all that stuff. And you're just going to hope this guy works. Like, why wouldn't you go get somebody that you know is good?
Well, I agree, and they also had the 20th pick. They had the Cowboys pick, so essentially you could have traded Roy Williams for Matt Cassel, which would have been a good trade.
Yes, you make that trade.
You make that trade, but again, it goes back to teams are reluctant to make deals. You know, people believe that it's more. They don't watch Matt Cassel with the same eye that they watch Matt Stafford. You know, everybody's a little more easy on Matt Stafford, even though he makes mistakes in a game, whereas Matt Cassel, well, that's Belichick really coaching him, or Belichick doing this.
I understand that.
You know, and to me, it's remarkable. You watch Matt Cassel's development from the time he took over to the last game of the season, and he's a bona fide NFL quarterback who's ready to win in any system.
Well, here's what bothers me about that whole system thing, and we've talked about this many times in the podcast. I'm convinced that being a quarterback is 75% how you deal with your teammates and your coaches and how you win them over and the respect that you garner from everyone around you. It's really, you're the leader, and that matters more than anything else, whether it's strong arm, whether you can scramble out of the pocket, whatever. Cassel did that. He won that team over. That team was like a mess after Brady went down, and within 2 months, they were totally invested in him. He was one of the leaders of the team. They loved him. You know, as soon as McDaniels goes to Denver, he's trying to trade for him. Like, how do people miss this guy? I don't get it.
It's very perplexing. I mean, what more can you see than the throw he makes to Randy Moss in the Jet game to send the game into overtime?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that throw is symbolic of so much. On the move, making a play at the end of the game, throwing it into the end zone, not throwing it short of the end zone. We've seen quarterbacks make that throw short of the end zone, and they wonder why they don't win the game.
And he got better as the season went along, which I think is crucial. Each month he got better.
But the problem you get in the NFL is there's a lot of people that don't want to stand on a table and say this guy's really good. It's a lot easier to stand on the table and say Mark Sanchez is good because it's college and everybody expects if the college kid doesn't work out, well, that's just the way the nature of the draft. You know, for some reason, trades in the NFL are very difficult to do because people feel like why would they be trading a guy and getting rid of him if he was so good?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Going into next season, or when next season is unfolding, San Francisco, the Niners fans are going to be really upset when they see what he does for Kansas City. I think the Viking fans, as they watch Sage Rosenfels, do his routine.
Turn the ball over like DeVaris Jackson did?
Yeah, I think they're going to be a little upset that maybe their team didn't get in. I think Lions fans are going to be upset. I think there's going to be 7 or 8 fan bases that are just going to be like, what the hell? Why? This guy went for the 34th pick, and he has single-handedly turned the Chiefs into like a 9-17.
You don't think that if Bill Walsh were still running the 49ers, they wouldn't have been after Matt Cassel?
It makes no sense. And, well, let's talk about the Denver aspect of this because, I don't know, say what you want about Cutler. I always kind of liked him. He's a little flighty. I'm not quite sure on the whole leadership part with him. I don't follow the Broncos. He always seemed like he was a little flighty to me, but he certainly had a great arm. He played that awesome game in Giant Stadium that you talked about where he was just whipping the ball through 40-mile-an-hour winds. Hey, this guy seemed like a franchise quarterback to me. It's a little surprising that they were shopping him.
Yeah, and it's surprising that it goes back to the beginning of this whole off season. Look, if you're the Detroit Lions, and I think Jim Schwartz is a fabulous football coach, but if you're the Detroit Lions, you know you need a quarterback and you need a coach.
Yeah.
And you can get Matt Cassel and you can get Josh McDaniel all in one hire. You basically do McDaniel, and then you have the 20th pick. There's some thought process. And going to Denver, that seemed to me to keep an option for Matt Cassel closed down because Josh McDaniel knew him. It would have been an easy trade to make. But this whole thing, to me, is about Josh McDaniel putting his stamp on the Denver Broncos.
Yep.
It's his way of turning things around, and he's letting everybody know he's in charge. And that, look, Jay Cutler's upset, understand, but he's going to have to get happy again because the sheriff wants him to play the way he wants him to play, not the way he thinks he should play.
I got to ask you, is it possible that this little merry-go-round hasn't stopped yet? Like, what would happen if Detroit said, hey, we'll give you, Kansas City, we'll give you the 20th pick. So you basically you've turned Cassel from the 34th pick into the 20th pick. You give Cassel to Denver, and Denver gives us Cutler.
Well, I don't think that Kansas City and Denver are going to cooperate with one another, nor do I think Denver would want Cutler to have to play against Cutler twice. I think the merry-go-round has stopped once Denver made that. Now, Denver claims they didn't make any calls, which, whether you want to believe that or not, that's their own prerogative. They obviously had some interest. They were willing to listen, and they upset their quarterback. But, that to me is being blown out of proportion because you can make the quarterback happy again. He's supposed to make you happy. You're not supposed to make him happy. So, I think it's stopped because Cassel is at a place, and unless Denver can get Cassel, I don't believe they would be interested in trading Cutler. I think the team that really was the scene behind the scenes here was Tampa Bay. For one reason, Jim Bates, the new defensive coordinator, was in Denver. His son coached Jay Cutler. His son is now at USC, Jeremy Bates.
Yep.
And Tampa Bay, and I'm sure Jim Bates, and I know he feels very strongly about Cutler, Tampa wants to have a quarterback. So if they could have found a way to work this out with Tampa involved, then I think something would have happened. But I just don't think Tampa had enough gumption and enough power to get it done.
Well, from the reports, it seems like they kind of waited too long.
Yeah, again, it goes back to you have to be decisive. There's a difference between hope and a plan. You can't confuse hope for a plan. You want to hope to have a good quarterback, but what's your plan to get a good quarterback? Now, everybody in the National Football League thinks the Bucs are in love with Josh Freeman, the quarterback at Kansas State, who Reed Morris coached when he was at Kansas State as a defensive coordinator. Well, he's with them. He didn't coach them. So everybody knows Tampa wants to put a quarterback on the franchise. You've got to be aggressive. That's the number one thing you have to do. You have to find a solution. I think you learn this in basketball. You can have a lot of parts, but if you don't have the right parts, you can't win.
So what do the Pats do now with this extra $18 million in cap space?
Well, they're sitting there with 3 number 2 picks. Okay, they have
23.
And 23. So that, to me, is 4 starters. I believe they get younger on defense. They get faster on defense. Vrabel, to me, and I know the Patriot fans think that they just gave Vrabel. Vrabel was the throw-in in the deal. He's going to be free agent in 2010. He really didn't rush the passer as well this year as they'd hoped. He's a liability in space. Great kid, great leader. It wouldn't shock me if he didn't make the Chiefs team this year.
Yeah, I didn't think he was that good last year, and I think they needed to get younger on those corner linebackers. So
they need to get more speed on defense. I think this will mean Vince Wilfork's contract gets extended. I think they'll do something with Seymour. I think they'll put money back into their own team a little bit a la Billy B and the Oakland A's, like you talked about. I think this is where they take that money. I don't think they're going to go out and start shopping a la Daniel Snyder.
Yeah, they need to get deeper. It's a team that, and this is what worries me about having the 23rd pick and the 3 second-round picks as a Pats fan. I don't think they've done a great job of drafting guys the last 4 or 5 years. They need to have a huge draft this year.
Look at their offensive line. I mean, the one year they drafted a bunch of guys to try to fix the line, and none of them are on the team. No, they have to step up, but I think they realize that in New England. They've got to step up and make some better picks and get younger, especially defensively. They've got to get that team speed back. They've got to be able to create turnovers with their defense because, look, we know Tom Brady's back. We know they're going to be good at, with Fred Taylor, which to me is a huge signing for them.
I like the Fred Taylor signing.
I love the Fred Taylor signing. That really makes them explosive. It gives them, less of Fred Taylor is more of Fred Taylor, And with Fred Taylor and Welker, and I think they'll get a receiver for the outside to complement them. They obviously didn't want to pay the money for Gaffney that he ended up getting, so they let him go to Denver. So,
well, you mentioned this. Hold on, you mentioned this on National Football Post today, and I hadn't thought of it, but it makes a ton of sense for them. Lance Moore. If you give up one of those 3 second-round picks for Lance Moore, that's a nice type of Patriot player.
Yeah, I think Lance Moore sitting out there, he's just to be taken for. And to me, it makes no sense. Look, I like T.J. Houshmandzadeh. I think he's a nice complementary player. But Lance Moore, to me, again, if I were the Vikings, I'd rather have Lance Moore in the slot with
for half the price.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Saints can't match him. The Saints are snug to the cap. They've got some other issues. They're trying to sign Darren Sharper today. They're trying to do so much, they can't really get this done.
Anyone who plays fantasy football is well aware of Mr. Lance Moore. Looking at what the Pats did with the Welker trade 2 years ago, where they gave up a 2nd and a 7th, I think.
Yeah.
I think they'd do that one again. To me, it's a lot of this stuff is common sense. Lance Moore's sitting there. He's a starter. He's somebody that makes your offense better. I don't know what I'm getting from a second-round pick. I might get a good pick. I might get a bad pick. But I know Lance Moore is good.
Yeah, and he's young. I mean, that's the thing that makes what the Giants did so good is the Giants signed 3 relatively young players. Rocky Bernard's only 29.
Yeah.
But they signed 3 guys in their primes. You can't make a mistake with that.
You like the Canty signing? I thought it was a little expensive.
I thought the Canty signing to go along with their defensive line and their rotation is just – they have the best defensive line in the NFL now, and they have the best offensive line.
Why has Dallas been so quiet?
Well, they're trying to get DeMarcus Ware re-signed, and I think that's an issue. And they don't really have the big splash that they made in free agency last year was Roy Williams, and they did it last October. So that made the splash. So, Dallas's point of view, and I'm not sure I agree with this, when you look at them on defense, I don't know if Keith Brookings can give them what they really need. But, Dallas's point of view is they've get their act together off the field, they'll be much better on the field. I'm not sure of that.
I would also try to upgrade the Ken Hamlin spot, considering he single-handedly cost them the playoffs.
You can, him and, Zach Thomas hurt them. So, they're really relying on a couple of guys to come through for them, and it'll be really interesting to see what they do. Right now, to me, the Giants have separated themselves from the pack.
Oh, you're in the bag with the Giants. I'm tired of you, Lombardi. Stop blowing the Giants. Enough.
Well, you got to look at it fairly. I mean, look, they didn't really have lost anything. They've got the draft now to get themselves the skill players that they need to make them better. They should go after Lance Moore for a second-round pick.
Oh, this Lance Moore thing drives me crazy. Belichick, if you're listening, just give up one of the number 2s for Lance Moore. This guy, you get Brady and Welker and Lance Moore and Randy Moss. Nobody's stopping that offense if Brady's
and then you put Fred Taylor in the backfield. I mean, see, what people don't realize about Fred Taylor is you still have to account for him when he's in the game, and that big play explosion. And then when you add him with Sammy Morris, now you've got you really have that thunder and lightning element that you need to be an explosive offense.
The reason I like the Fred Taylor signing, and again, this goes back to fantasy football and being just a nerd who follows this stuff relentlessly, but that line couldn't block. Like, it kind of looked like if you just studied the stats or whatever, you'd think, oh, yeah, Fred Taylor, it finally happened, he's done. But that line couldn't block for anybody. Like, even when Mojo would break runs, it was always because of him and not because of anything the line did. So you always want to get the guy who's going from the atrocious offensive line to the decent offensive line.
Yeah, and look, Khalif Barnes, a young offensive lineman, is on the market, started left tackle for almost 4 years for the Jacksonville Jaguars. It wasn't signed over the weekend. What does that tell you about their offensive line?
It doesn't say much. Where do you see happen with Matt Hasselbeck? Because he seems to be the other kind of veteran quarterback who could potentially maybe go.
But the question is to trade Matt, who are they going to play? They lived through Seneca Wallace last year. And they saw that didn't work. And this is the first quarterback that Greg Knapp has had in his career since he's left, really, in his career as an offensive coordinator. Jeff Garcia, a little bit of one, but he tended to move around the pocket. Goes to Atlanta, Michael Vick, all he wants to do is move around the pocket. Goes to Oakland, he's got Jamarcus Russell, all he wants to, he's not a West Coast. This is the first time he gets a guy who truly is a West Coast quarterback. It would be hard for me to think that Seattle can find a player as good as Matt Hasselbeck in a trade, and how are they going to replace him, so how could they get rid of him?
Fair points. My question is, like, where are you going if Matt Hasselbeck's your QB? Does he have more value for what you can turn him into than what just keeping him? Like, other teams might think he's more valuable than you probably realize that he is, because he really can't stay healthy anymore, it doesn't seem like.
But you're using common sense, and we just saw Matt Cassel play 15 games, and there wasn't teams that went after him. I mean, the 49ers have Sean Hill at quarterback. They're very content to play Sean Hill, and so you can't have logic on Matt Hasselbeck when there was no logic on Matt Cassel. And here's the thing that's so unbelievable: if Matt Cassel was on the open market and Belichick didn't franchise him, he would have had 6 or 7 teams chasing him.
Right.
But because it cost you a second-round pick or a pick at the bottom, everybody said, well, wait a minute. Well, don't people realize that when you turn a card in, you're turning a player in? So wouldn't you trade, let's take a guy at the bottom of the first round for Matt Cassel? Because that's ultimately what you did.
Hold on. While we're talking, I'm going to go on footballreference.com, because I was looking at last year's draft. Because, it's exciting. The Pats have a whole bunch of picks and good times, hey, 3 second-rounders. But then you look at the guys as I wait for my computer to download and I stall and I procrastinate. Come on, let's do it here. All right, it's just going to take forever, so I'm going to talk. You look at the guys who end up going in that second round. Like, here's last year. Or here's 2008. So Dustin Keller, it goes 30. Kenny Phillips, 31. Philip Merling, 32. Donnie Avery, 33. Devin Thomas, 34. Brandon Flowers, 35. Jordy Nelson, 36. Curtis Lofton, 37. So,
you wouldn't trade any of those guys for Matt Cassel?
Yeah,
I mean, come on. Look, I like Dusty Keller. He's a nice pass-receiving tight end, but he can't block anybody. Curtis Lofton is a nice linebacker, but if you line up in 3 receivers and 1 back, he's standing next to you. He can't play a nickel. Philip Merling's a really good player. The only reason he slipped there was because of the injuries. But, the second round is normally where you can find Brandon Flowers is a certain system kind of corner that has to play in the right place. Kansas City played a lot of Tampa, too. I'm sure they'll probably try to play the same way because that's got to fit his game. But, look, if you can get a franchise quarterback in the 20s, don't you take it every time?
Well, there are a couple home run picks last year. Matt Forte went 44. Ed Royal went 42. Deshaun Jackson went 49. But, you look like, I guess Donnie Avery at 33 is pretty good. He had some moments last year, but, you look like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 wide receivers drafted in the second round last year, and 2 of them really panned out as immediate impact guys right away. Probably 5 of them will be out of the league in 5 years. And going back, I hate to beat this in the ground, but what's the worst case scenario for trading for Matt Cassel? So he's going to be decent and not very good? He's not going to be a bust. We know that much.
Yeah, and you just sit there like Donnie Avery would be a much better player if they had a quarterback to help him.
Yeah.
Is Mark Bulger going to really help him? I mean, is he at this point in his career where it's over with? But again, here's the big issue, and this is what happens in the NFL. Unless there's a coach in the building standing on the table saying we got to have Matt Cassel, it's going to be very difficult for people to make the trade because somebody wants to take accountability. And what happens often in the NFL is nobody wants to be wrong. And
how about this? How does Carolina bring back Jake Delhomme? Or as you call him, Delhomme. How did they bring him back after what happened in the playoffs? How do they reintroduce him to their fans and say, you know what, this is going to be a much better year with Jake Delhomme. Forget about last year. I don't know how you do that.
They're hoping nobody watches NFL Rewind on NFL Network.
Well, when you look at like the available QBs that are out there, there's a couple kind of minor sleepers. I think Troy Smith on Baltimore should start for somebody potentially, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Troy Smith.
They're committed to Joe Flacco. Like, why? Troy Smith, cheap contract. Why wouldn't you go out and get him?
Again, it comes back to the quarterback. Bill Walsh said this to me back in 1984. The hardest position to evaluate is the quarterback, and the hardest position to coach is the quarterback, and there are very few people who can do it. And that's ultimately the answer to your questions. Why don't somebody go after Troy Smith? Because there's nobody in there. Everybody wants to take the negative approach on Troy. Well, he's too short. He can't do this. Had he not gotten sick, he would have been the starting quarterback. And I really wonder how much of a difference would Baltimore's team had been had they not had him in there, had he played as opposed to Flacco.
You took the words right out of my mouth. If all you have to do is research this, that guy was the starting quarterback and then got sick. Flacco stepped in, and they didn't want to change it once it got going. But Troy Smith, at one point in like mid-August, was evaluated as being better than Joe Flacco for that team, which tells me that he should start for somebody. Then the other guy, are we sold that Derek Anderson's not a QB?
The problem with Derek Anderson is when he's to me the Dave Kingman of quarterbacks. It's either home run or strikeout. And, his percentage is never going to be great. He's never going to be above 55% completions. But what happened to him last year, whether it's Braylon Edwards' fault, whether it's Joshua Cribbs' fault, whether it's Dante Stallworth's fault, but every time he had a big throw to make in the game, if he put it there, they dropped it. If he didn't put it there, it went incomplete. He had too many long foul balls. And when he doesn't make big plays down the field, Derek Anderson isn't a very good player. He's never going to be a guy who's going to be a high percentage of completion, and that's what's the problem. Now, Brady Quinn's got the same issues. Brady Quinn in Cleveland is very inaccurate. He doesn't throw the deep ball nearly as well as Derek Anderson. So between the two of them, I'm not sure Cleveland has a quarterback.
See, again, using common sense, Derek Anderson, terrible head coach, just terrible. They had this other high draft pick that's just kind of lurking over him like a shadow. And on top of that, I watched the Browns last season. I didn't think he was as bad as his numbers show because I specifically watched 10 different passes that Braylon Edwards dropped that would have gone for 40 yards. So to me, that's somebody I would take a gamble on maybe.
And I think the Browns are going to take that same gamble. I think the Browns have looked through all the offensive tape and said, you know what? Are we really going to put all our hopes into Brady Quinn's basket? I mean, maybe the Cleveland media wants him to do that because he's a hometown kid and everybody loves him. But not willing to put all my eggs in the Brady Quinn basket. If it were me, I'd be sure of that. And the roster bonus that's due for Derek Anderson in March, I'd pay it. It's a protection.
Well, here's my third guy. I like Tyler Thigpen. Thought he was decent. I don't think he's going to ever make an all-pro team, but he's certainly better than some of the guys we're going to see starting behind center next year.
He was better than Brody Coyle, who Herm Edwards spent 6 days and nights in Hard Knocks 2 years ago deciding on if he was going to be his quarterback. Do you remember that pondering that was going on there?
Lay off Herm. He's one of us now.
Yes, but here's the thing.
We can't build on this anymore.
Yeah, we can't. Let's build something together. But Tyler Thigpen is really – but I really commend the Chiefs for going after – Cassel, even though because you could have kid yourself into thinking that Tyler Thigpen was great and we don't really need a quarterback. And I agree with you. I like Tyler Thigpen. I like some of the things he did, but I still like the fact you have I'd rather have two guys that can play than hope one can. Remember, don't confuse hope for a plan.
I love when you throw those out. The whole thing about Thigpen though is you just basically turn the team over to Cassel. Why not get something for Thigpen right now? Because that guy was starting in Fantasy League playoffs for a variety of teams around the country. Like, clearly he's somewhat competent.
I will give you another one of your personal favorites, the great clock manager Dick Curl, whose new book's coming out, How to Manage the Clock in 25 Seconds or Less, on New York Times bestseller list. He's in St. Louis. And I have a hunch, just a hunch, that maybe Dick Curl's telling the St. Louis brass, we should get Tyler Thigpen. Now, those are the kind of things that happen in the league. That's how guys get traded.
Yeah. Hey, did you think that the Kellen Winslow trade was this year's Jeremy Shockey trade just awful?
You know, for me, I like Kellen Winslow. I like him as a player. I just don't understand what this whole pass receiving tight end issue for me is a little bit difficult to understand, because ultimately it doesn't win the game. It's window dressing.
Right.
I said it last year. Wouldn't the Saints have been better off trading for a running back? You know, instead of Jeremy Shockey, you put all those resources in a position that unless you have the right team, it's not effective. I mean, look, the Patriots are not going to take Wes Welker off the field to put a pass-receiving tight end in there. You know, that's the problem with the Patriots. They don't have Ben Watson's their pass catcher. They don't have an on-the-line Y. Now, maybe they do with Chris Baker. So you can't utilize them as well as you need to.
Here's everything you need to know about the NFL. The Buccaneers desperately need a quarterback, and they actually paid more for Kellen Winslow than they probably would have had to give up for Cassel, right?
Exactly. And that's what led us to think that all this Jay Cutler talk was just a lot of talk that never really got momentum going.
Yeah.
Because really, ultimately, when you walk in the job, that's the first thing you say. Look, Bill Cowher has told everybody, I'm not coming back in the NFL and spending 4 years trying to find a quarterback. I've seen Neil O'Donnell. I've watched Tommy Maddox play. I finally got Ben Roethlisberger, and I won. I know I say that name wrong all the time, but Big Ben.
Yeah, I forwarded you some of the emails.
Yeah.
My defense was that you were just tired and you didn't feel like saying all the syllables, but you knew it was Roethlisberger.
Yeah, the thing is, you have to understand, when you deal with all these names, like I have always done in my career, we nickname everybody. I mean, like Jason Sehorn has never been Jason Sehorn in my life. He was always Seabiscuit, you know? And so you kind of get caught in it because you're dealing with them. And but anyway, Cowher understands you got to have a quarterback. And if you're Tampa Bay and you're a new coach starting a new program, that's the first thing you can do. Look, fellas, we're not doing anything until we get a quarterback.
I almost think the worst thing that happened this decade in terms of building teams was when the Bucs won that Super Bowl with Brad Johnson. It just kind of made everybody think they could win with a stopgap, and that position ultimately didn't matter. Meanwhile, the last 5-6 years totally contradict that thought process. You need to have a good quarterback.
And you would think that with Atlanta's success this year, of what Matt Ryan brought to that franchise, that people would put that more into their thought process, into their planning. But, you know, you see it too often. Tampa's going to run the risk. Hopefully, what happens if Josh Freeman doesn't make it to him? What happens if they don't get a quarterback in this draft?
They're going to stink. They especially in that division. I don't think you can. You know, that's a big boys division. You're not going to patchwork your way into 10 wins in the NFC South. I don't think. You know, what happens to Michael Vick?
I think Michael Vick has to go to a team like New England, like the Jets, with a strong head coach.
Like New England.
Like New England.
You just sent chills down my spine.
You know, that'll have somebody who's not, you know, whose owner's behind the head coach, who's not going to say, I don't want the guy on the team, and come in and fit a role. Who's better at defining roles for players than people from that Parcells-Belichick-in program?
You're asking me to accept Stephon Marbury and Michael Vick in my life in the same calendar year? How am I supposed to do that?
Well, here's the thing about Vick. The Michael Vick that you remember was always talked in the third person. This Michael Vick, and I'm assuming this because I haven't had any direct contact with him, is a little humble now. And he's willing to do whatever it takes to be a good football player again. And he's willing to play maybe other positions. And maybe he's willing to accept his role as a teammate a lot better. And these are all assumptions, and I could be completely wrong. But if that's the Michael Vick that is of today, then of Miami, a team that then can understand and how to utilize him as the second, as a kind of a utility infielder in their offense to create some big plays, has great value.
I don't think I could root for him. And I'll root for just about anybody, but hurting dog, when you hurt a dog, I'm out.
Yeah,
I can't root for somebody.
You know, and I understand that. And there, we live in the age of forgiveness, and he certainly has paid a tremendous price for what was wrong thing to do. There's no doubt, and I'm not arguing that. I'm talking about him as a football player.
Yeah, it's really tough for me to root for somebody who once owned a rape stand. and put dogs on it. I just think at some point, I don't know. I just couldn't do it. And I've rooted for some of the biggest lowlifes in the history of sports, but I think I'd have trouble.
Well, we know where your line is. That's important.
It's my line.
You know who you are. I mean,
you hurt dogs and I'm out. I'm out on you. I don't care what happens after that.
And you like the tattoo on the side of Stephon Marbury's head, don't you? You enjoyed that. I mean, that was always good to see. I didn't realize that was there before until I saw it the other day.
You know, it's funny that he lit up, he came in on Friday night and he played really well. So I called my dad and I was like, hey, Marbury, looking good. And there was like this pause and Dad goes, he has a tattoo in his head. That was his reaction. He just couldn't get past it. He just keeps coming back to the tattoo in his head. So it's going to be interesting. I got to say though, I've always had the theory you can take a gamble on one of those guys, and by those guys, I mean capital letter T and a G. I think the Pats with Randy Moss have already kind of filled that slot, but I do think on the right team, Vic, as you said, certain packages, maybe use him in that the Wildcat and all that different stuff. He really could be dangerous.
And he's 29 years old. He'll be the fastest guy on the field when he comes back. I assume he's probably done nothing but stay in shape. I mean, I don't know lifestyles in jail, but I would suspect that he's in shape, and I don't think he's eaten as well as he probably could have eaten. So I don't think his weight's going to be too high, but
why don't you know about lifestyles in jail? I thought you came prepared for the podcast.
Well, I've watched The Wire. I've watched all 5 seasons of The Wire. I kind of understand all this.
Why don't you rent Oz? Why don't you go through the 7 seasons of Oz to understand?
I'm going to have to get
better.
onto something. I'm waiting for Mad Men. I listened to your podcast with Don Draper to see if when it was coming back, and I had a sigh when you said it wasn't coming back until he said sometime in August. I was like, I thought I was getting it in March.
Yeah, but you just like Mad Men because of Christina Hendricks. Let's be honest.
Well, there's a lot to say. I mean, she is truly. I'm convinced now. She is truly the Ginger of this generation.
Oh, interesting. I compared her to Shaq with somebody. I was on some podcast where I said she's like Shaq. Maybe not the dominant player of her generation, but the dominant force that we'll remember. The one of a kind. There's only one Shaq in the last 20 years. There's only one Christina Hendricks.
And I really believe your scouting eye was incredible because the girl that's going to marry Cooper, you promoted immediately, and everybody was Googling her name. I got to give you credit for that. I forgot her name, but I got to give you credit for that one.
Thank you.
She was a star.
Hey, 4 quick things for you, and then we'll let you go.
All right.
Brian Dawkins leaves the Eagles. How do the Eagle fans come to grips with that?
Well, they won't. They'll blame McNabb. They'll do something. I mean, it's just Philadelphia. We've traded Wilt Chamberlain away. It's always the world's coming to an end. But Brian Dawkins is a great player. The bigger concern here, and if you're an Eagle fan, this is what you have to worry the most about, is the health of Jim Johnson. He's battling melanoma. He's coming back from that. He's the key, and he's the glue to that team. Love Brian Dawkins as a player, but always, as you know, sometimes things have to come to an end. And somebody once told me, and I believe this to be true, the Michigan-Ohio State game in the year 2050 is already sold out, and the kids haven't even been born yet because of the uniforms. And I think that applies here. So, look, I think Brian Dawkins is a great player. The Eagles will move on, but let's hope Jim Johnson's healthy. He can beat this cancer or melanoma, and that's what's really going to make the Eagles continue to be a good defense.
$5 million for Lonnie Paxton.
Most unbelievable thing, and I said it on NFL Network this week. I've never seen an opening weekend where you come in with a long snapper. Of all and I can long snap, so for me, this is a hard one because I'm thinking to myself, gosh, if I had just done a better job at Hofstra long snapping, I think I could have had a career. Opening weekend to sign a long snapper, I don't get that one.
It's almost like in baseball signing like a lefty specialist. And you're just throwing huge chunks of money at this guy because we got to get a guy who gets lefties out. Not really. I mean,
to me, I almost thought it was the bullpen catcher, Bill. I thought it was the bullpen catcher.
I think, it all comes back to that one Giants game when they got knocked out of the playoffs because of the long snapper. That just put the fear of God in everybody. Kurt Warner?
The Arizona Cardinals are walking the tight wire here, and I think they really need to be careful because this guy has done more for their franchise than anybody, and they can't be penny wise and dollar foolish. Because we all know, and I've experienced this as well as anybody. You haven't with the Patriots because they did rebound after losing a Super Bowl. But the hardest thing to do after losing a Super Bowl is maintain excellence. Everybody wants credit. Everybody wants the rewards of the satisfaction of the winning. And Kurt Warner deserves a lot of that. And they better get him signed because the Matt Leinart world that you could be walking into isn't what you want to live in.
You know, there's a specific phrase for the phenomenon you mentioned.
What's it called?
I can't believe you don't know this. You're the master of, like, motivational phrases and weird. You love this stuff. I'll give you a hint. Created by one Pat Riley.
I don't know this one. I'll write it down. I'll put it in my slide next time I do a speaking engagement.
Oh, well, he expounded on it in the Pulitzer Prize-winning Showtime, which he released in the late 80s. He called it the disease of more.
Yeah.
You do well. Everybody wants more. Guys want to get paid more money. They want more playing time. They want more attention. And how you survive the disease of more is how you end up winning multiple Super Bowls instead of one.
Well,
you like that?
I love it. I'm going to steal it. Or is
the
that
disease of more.
Somebody once told me I interviewed for a job. Somebody once told me when I said I stole this from somebody, they said, "Well, if you read it twice, it's not stealing, it's research." So I'm going to call it research.
All right, last two things. Dan Orlovsky, 3 years, $9.15 million.
Amazing. And I hope that the groundskeeper at the Reliance Stadium puts really bold lines on the back of the end zone.
How is that contract possible?
I have no idea.
That guy should not be making $10 an hour.
I have no idea. And, if you were willing to pay that much, you couldn't entice somebody else. If that's how much you had in your pocket, that was all you could get. That's the question you have to ask. If you're Patrick Ramsey or if you're Brian Leftwich, how much are you going to make now?
Who are they bidding against? Did his agent say?
They say they were bidding against Denver.
Okay.
Sure. But you've seen poker. Everybody says they're bidding against somebody when they don't get it, when that guy gets a ridiculous contract.
And speaking of poker, Ray Lewis looks like he left the table without any chips.
Yeah, he sure did. All that Dallas talk about him going there got ended with Keith Brookings, who signed a 3-year deal at a lot more financial sense for the Cowboys. I think Ray Lewis needs to go back to Baltimore and make a deal. But look, let's not Ray Lewis. It's not his fault. It's a little bit, when you see all this money being thrown around for guys that really aren't great players, you wonder, why isn't it my turn? Where is the money for me? And that's a hard thing to accept.
Last thing, and this is crucial. This is huge. You almost might want to take a breath, have a glass of water before this. So every year, somebody's odds, that the highest odds to win the Super Bowl, this is the time when you can nail some of these bets and nail them down. Here are the candidates. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, last year, Arizona was like 100-1 in March and almost paid off. Buffalo Bills 40-1. Chicago Bears 40-1. Bengals 60-1. I don't like any of these so far. Browns 60-1. Browns a little intriguing because they went from having a top 5 worst coach to possibly a competent one. Mm-hmm. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Detroit Lions 100-1, they're out. Oakland Raiders 100-1, they're out. St. Louis Rams 100-1, I think they're out. Niners 40-1, Seattle 40-1, Washington 40-1. Now here's the one I like. The Kansas City Chiefs 100-1.
Yeah, I don't disagree. The Chiefs now have a real issue. 10 sacks last year is all they could get on the quarterback. They're going to have to find it. They're going to draft Aaron Curry in the first round.
Well, what pick do they have?
The 3rd pick overall.
So and what does Aaron Curry do? Because I haven't boned up on my draft knowledge.
He's got some rush skills, and they'll draft some players that can do. He's a linebacker that can make plays, which is what ultimately they need.
And they have Glenn Dorsey from last year's draft.
If they can get him playing, he was on the ground more time than he was standing on his own 2 feet, which defensive linemen take a year to learn the league. The team I don't think you can rule out is the St. Louis Cardinals. I think they have the running back. I don't love Mark Bolger, but I think
the St. Louis Rams?
I'm sorry.
You just turned into my dad for a second.
Yeah. The St. Louis Rams. I think the Rams have a unique team in the sense that they have a running back. If they can keep him healthy, they've hired a defensive coordinator, so they're going to be a little bit better defensively. And they play in a division that isn't very talented. So they're the team that, and if they have a good off season, they could do some things.
What pick do they have?
They have the 2nd pick overall.
And who are they taking with the 2nd pick overall?
I would suspect they're going to take a left tackle, whether it's kid from Virginia Tech, Monroe, or if they took Andre Smith, who's slipping a little bit in the draft. But there's an offensive lineman they'll take, which they need to do. They're going to get rid of Orlando Pace.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Because he hasn't played more than 5 games in the last 3 seasons?
Yeah, again, they
it's kind of sad, though.
They confuse hope for a plan there at times. They hope he's going to be healthy.
So you're saying, because you kind of like my Kansas City pick as well.
I do. I'm about quarterbacks and how to manage the game. And, I like dome teams. I love dome teams. And I think that dome teams always have an advantage because they should be able to win 7 of their games at home because of the crowd noise. So I do like that. That's why I like St. Louis. I think Spagnuolo is a very good football coach. I think he'll improve them as a team. And they've got this whole off season to get some things done.
And, God, how many years in a row do we have to see this happen? Hey, the NFL is March Madness. There's no rhyme or reason to who's good one year and who's bad the next and vice versa. And really all it takes is 2 big draft picks, a coaching change, a couple of guys coming through. Maybe you didn't think were going to come through. Like, I look at Kansas City. I know Cassel's good because I watched him. I know Larry Johnson's good. I know Dwayne Bowe's good. I know that with Dorsey and whoever they draft this year.
You forgot Tony Gonzalez. Tony Gonzalez will catch 70 balls. He'll come back and play. And there's always a team like Miami that just gets organized and is well coached and manages the game correctly that can find a way to win 9 to 10 games, which Miami did.
Yeah, look at last year. Baltimore really comes with 1 or 2 plays of winning the Super Bowl. Of making the Super Bowl. Arizona almost wins the Super Bowl. It's just there's no rhyme or reason. So to me, it's just crazy that anybody is over 30-1 with odds. But
yeah, but again, it comes back to keep the quarterback healthy. If you can play solid defense and you don't give away the game, half these teams give away the game. But
the only thing with the Rams is Mark Bulger's got a fork in him, doesn't he?
Well, sometimes change is good for everybody, and at this point in Mark Bulger's career, he's going to need to make some decisions, and he's going to have to prove he's going to be a good player. Now, I believe they're going to turn the heat on him, whether they draft a quarterback at the top of the second, or maybe even they draft a quarterback at the second pick overall. Maybe they take Mark Sanchez. When your team's for sale, which the Rams are for sale, the best value you can put in them is put a young franchise quarterback there. It makes it more appealing.
Well, when you say change is good for Mark Bulger, I think that change would have to be a time machine. That's just my opinion.
I'm wondering why they were after Matt Cassel, so I agree with you. But he can hand the ball off to Steven Jackson, and they've got a couple big play guys, and I'm counting on them not screwing the game up.
I'm going to go one further, Mike Lombardi. Mm-hmm. Not only do I think the Chiefs are a major sleeper at 100-1, I also like the Kansas City Royals.
Now, that I don't know.
I know you don't know. I'm just saying, this really, you might be looking at the year of Kansas City. Yeah. As a sport, they might get an NBA team. They might have the Royals be, making some noise. They might have the Chiefs with a huge comeback. I'm telling you, watch out for Kansas City. All this stuff happens in clumps. Like, you look at what happened to Seattle last year, and it was like all the other stuff that happened just ended up submarining the Seahawks. It was like this black cloud that just came over to them. And by contrast, like you see, like the Patriots in 2002 kind of lifted the black cloud and opened all the possibilities for everything else that happened in Boston. So that's my theory. I'm going to ride the Kansas City train.
I like it.
All right, Mike Lombardi. So
right,
we get to read you on the National Football Post.
Thank you.
The page views are going up. We get to see you on NFL Network.
Yeah.
TV.
And I'm an LA guy now. I'm out here. I can't get back east, so I'm enjoying the weather.
The year of Lombardi continues. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Bill.
Okay, bye-bye.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.